Trackmania just dropped one of the most difficult campaigns I've ever seen. There were so many difficult tracks and I'm gonna rank them from 25 to 1. At place 25 we have track 21. This track is based on Argentina and it has like everything I hate about Trackmania. A lot of weird technical corners with a lot of ice and also some dirt. At the end you have to maneuver through some corners, to some barriers while being on ice, so that's very annoying to ride on. It took me a while to finish this track, and even though I finished it, it wasn't with a good time. So in the end I just gave up and I moved on from this track. At number 24 we have track 25. This track is based on Japan and it's a very nice track at the start. But eventually you have to like make a jump and land correctly while like being airborne. It's really weird. And then at the end you have some small gaps you have to drive through with some high speed, because otherwise you lose a lot of time. And that's what makes this track so damn hard, because you can finish it in a decent time I think, but to drive this track consistently good with a good time, I think it's very difficult. Personally, I'm not good enough to do that, so I struggled with each passage through those small gaps and I just couldn't maintain speeds to make a good time. It's an alright track but very difficult. Then we have the Norway track at number 23. Personally, Norway is one of my favorite countries in the world and this track isn't one of my favorites. Like I said with Argentina, I hate ice tracks and this one has a lot of ice, which is understandable. I think the track is alright to drive on. The ice bars aren't that difficult, but you have some jumps you have to make and you have to land on a very small track. So to make a good time and to even finish it is very hard, because you have to reset a lot of the times if you don't make it. And to make a good time you should not reset. After like 1 hour of trying, I couldn't manage a run without resetting. So I gave up and it's not high on my list. Without the jumps, I think this will be way up my list, because even though it has ice, it's still manageable and it's still like a very nice track, also because you have a lot of speed, but the jumps just ruined it for me. At number 22 we have track 22, the Saudi Arabia one. At the start you have some pretty nice turns you can take at like full speed and some nice jumps which fit perfectly, but then you have some jumps where you can choose where to land. If you have enough speed you can fit through gaps, and if you don't you have to land on like a effect area. And for someone who's not very good at the game, it's very hard to determine where you should land, because you don't know how much speed you got and you don't know if you can make a certain jump. Because some jumps you can make only when full speed, and some jumps you can also make when not full speed. So it's very hard for a noob like me to understand this track and to ride perfectly. But it's a fun track and I can see why people would like it, but I think a noob like me won't like this track. At place 21 we have track 15. This track gave me like Wipeout vibes. You have some obstacles you have to drive through and some weird loopings with some Wipeout surface kinda. And of course, like Wipeout, a lot of water. You could easily finish this track, but it was just like weird because this surface isn't used that much, so you didn't know where the grip was. It just felt really weird to drive on, but it was a doable track. It just wasn't fun to ride on. At number 20 we have track 18. And if you see this track and remember what I just said, you can already think of why this is that low. It's a high speed track, which I like, but it just has a lot of ice and I cannot maintain my speed on ice. I don't know how others do it, but every time I try to do what they're doing, I'm just like ramming into walls. Because it's high speed, I still place it kind of highly and not at the bottom of the list, because you could finish it easily. And I think I could get a gold medal, I just didn't yet, but I think I could. But it would take a lot of time, and to spend a lot of time on ice tracks is something I don't like. At place number 19 we have track 20. Just like ice tracks, I also don't like wood tracks. It is just very slippery and you make very tight turns. And this track makes you make tight turns. So I spent a lot of time looking at walls, running into them, running off the map and not finding the route. It was very trial and error and I just couldn't manage to set up a good time. And when I looked at the world record, I just gave up. He just flew through the map and I was already struggling with just seeing the normal route. So I was like, I'm not even gonna try that, and I'm just gonna stick to this normal route, which I think is the route I have to take. But it wasn't that fun to ride. I can imagine people liking these type of tracks. It's like high speed and finding new routes that could be faster, but personally I just want to stick to a road and ride fast on it with some grip. At number 18 we have track 14. This track was just very weird. It isn't difficult, but it was just a weird one to drive. And when I looked at the other times how I could improve myself, I felt like I couldn't really improve because it just felt like I was doing that already. So it was like a kind of easy track, but just a weird one. It had a weird vibe with a lot of elevation differences and some weird jumps. It felt like this track missed a lot of things because it felt like we were riding a shortcut instead of the track. So like with the track before this, I said you could like experiment with faster routes, and here you just already have the fastest route in front of you and you can't really improve yourself. But at least it was easy to drive. At number 17 we have track 7. This track was very GTA coded. It had a sandy surface and I can manage to ride on that. I'm liking it, I want to say, because I can always ride very fast on these type of tracks, but I just hate that it was GTA coded because I don't like loopings on sand. This track had very awkward corners where you didn't line up well to make the looping, and it was just a track where you were too close to a wall, so there was a lot of room for mistakes. At number 16 we have track 10. A track with a lot of small jumps and a lot of weird corners, weird long corners as well. It was alright to drive on, but it was just hard to improve on. It just felt like you could easily find the route you wanted to take, the pathing you wanted to ride on, but it just didn't feel like you could improve your time that easily, and it didn't really feel like a challenge to like spend a lot of time on this track. With the jumps they tried to be a little bit experimental, but it just didn't work because the track was just too easy at the end, I feel like. At place 15 we have track 19. This has to be the weirdest track of this campaign. Just some small grass patches through high grass and the checkpoints just all randomly throughout the map. This track totally didn't feel like a challenge. I had easily a green time on this and I just moved on because it wasn't that special. It was just straightforward driving. I think if I put some time in it maybe I could get a green medal, but it was just not that fun to ride on. It was pretty straightforward, so it's very beginners friendly, but for track 19 I feel like you have to put up more of challenge maybe. At number 14 we have track 12. Again a sandy track and a very easy one. It was at the start a bit hard to find the pathing, but when you found the right path it was just a bit boring and it was too slow for me. There was just not really something special about this track. At place 13 we have track 13. This track already is a lot better because it's some speed. We have some more speed in the tracks, not those slow, sandy, grassy tracks, but some speed. But what I didn't like is that there were so many turns that it just looks like this track didn't want you to speed. It was kind of difficult to memorize all the turns and all the right pathing through the turns. And the last big turn was also kind of difficult because you wanted to go to the inside of the turn, but there was snow, and if you touch the snow you just fucked up your time. So it was an alright track, but just a lot of random turns and kind of difficult turns, but it was alright. Not all the end tracks were that difficult. There was one which I placed really high at number 12, and that's track 24. This track was based on Poland and I really liked it. I liked to drive on it. I could reach pretty far pretty fast. The only problem was the jumps at the end. Those were pretty difficult because you had to have the right speed to make the jumps. Because if you were just a little slower than that, you could not make the jump. So I struggled a lot with that and I couldn't manage to finish this track a lot of times. But even though this track was kind of difficult at the end, it was still really nice to drive on, and I could see myself like try to get a good time on this. It has like every ingredient of Trackmania, and it has a lot of speed, which I like. If those jumps at the end were a little bit easier to make, I think this would have been higher on the list. The end tracks are mostly difficult, but the begin tracks are mostly easy. But this one, it was easy, but it was just not that fun. And that was track number 2, a sandy track which tried to gain a lot of speed, but there was like one big jump in the middle and you had to gain enough speed through the corner before to make that jump. And once you made that jump, you had a lot of speed for the basically last corner. That's the track. There's nothing more to it. So it just felt like a pretty straightforward track, and like everyone would have gotten like around the same time or something, because everyone just had to make that jump and has the same amount of speed. And that also makes it that it's really hard to improve your own time, because the only time you gain is like at the last turn and at the first turn, and the rest is like pretty straightforward. So it was just kind of a boring track to start off the campaign with. The first top 10 entry is track number 5. This track starts off really slow, but then you gain some speed through some boosters. And this track is mainly like underwater, and then you have some sands which are quite easy to turn, and if you stick on the outside of that turn you gain a lot of speed, and then you have another boost, and if you just line up correctly you can go straight to the finish. And like I'm explaining it, it was also very easy to drive on, and it was quite enjoyable to drive on, but there wasn't much to it. You couldn't improve that much, and it was also straightforward like the previous track, but this one was just more fun to drive. At number 9 we have track 4. At the start you can gain a lot of speed by making some tight turns and also sticking to the sidewalls, and then you have a wall ride to the end, and when you come off that wall ride you gain a lot of speed and have like a sandy bit where you could gain a little bit of speed by drifting, and then there was the finish. It's a pretty easy track. The start was the most difficult, but that's also nice because you can just rewind it fast. But once you got a nice turn into the start, it was really easy to improve your time. But at the end it was just not much to improve your time on. It was just pretty straightforward to the finish, and you could only gain some time at the drift at the sandy part. So that was just the only annoying part about this track. But besides that, it was just a nice track. At number 8 we have track 17. It was a very difficult track. It had a lot of speed with a lot of sand, which I know a lot of people hate. Personally, I like it, but for me it was also difficult. You had like one shortcut, which I found out at the start. But personally, I could manage to maintain my speed through the whole map, and I just had a good time at the start. I just found the right path from the start, and it was just nice to drive on. I think a lot of people would hate this track, but I just loved it because it was just good for me. At number 7 we have track 3. This track was pretty straightforward with a technical turn where you have to drift around the corner. But at the start it was just maintaining speed, gaining speed by sticking close to the wall. And then you have like a grass bit where you can line up a drift around the corner to make a good turn towards the finish. It was a nice track, and it was nice because you gain a lot of speed, but also need some skill to make that drift and to make that turn perfectly to the finish. So it was a mix of nice, fast, but also skill, and it was just a decent track. Talking about speed, the next track is track number 16. This track was just so much speed, but I think it was just a bit too much. To improve your time on this track you had to stick closely to the wall, because that's what you have to do with the sand tracks. But it's also very difficult because there were a lot of stuff that kept you from sticking close to the wall. And that's the only reason why it's so low. It was kind of nice to drive on, but at the start it was kind of hard. But once you remember the track you could easily set up a good time. At number 5 we have track 1. The first track of the campaign was a pretty nice one. It was very nice to come into. It was kind of speedy and very technical, because every turn had to be perfect. If you messed up one turn, you're gonna line up shitty for the other one. If this was a longer track I would have hated, because of that, but this was just a perfect size of map for this track. At number 4 we have track 6. This track was just for me like a personal favorite. It was very technical with a lot of drifting. I just really liked all those technical turns where you have to drift through the corners, and at the end you had like a jump to drift towards the finish, which was also kind of nice. So yeah, it was just a nice track where you could just drive forward and just steer through the corners and go to the finish. Not much to it. At number 3 we have track 9. This track was very satisfying to drive. You had those platforms where you could land like a little bit sideways to end up in a drift for the corner, which I really liked, because with those drifts you could gain a lot of speed to land perfectly in a ramp and go fast through the long turns towards the finish. It was just a very satisfying nice track. Number 2 we have track 8. I think you can see a pattern why I like certain tracks, because this track was speed. It was very easy, and at the end it was a bit technical by just not steering a lot, because then you lose time. So it was just speed and not much more, which also made it not that fun because you couldn't improve that much, but the end was a bit tricky, so you could also like improve something at the end. At number 1 we have track 11. The main difference for me between track 11 and track 8 is that track 11 has a different kind of surface, and at this surface you can just drift. And the fact you can drift around these corners I like the most, because then you can always improve yourself. You can find another place to drift, you can find another turn to drift, you can find another angle to turn into a turn. You can just find a lot of stuff to improve your time, and that's what I like about this track. Do you agree with my rankings? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.